This talk is a continuation of the previous talk. My previous talk was on Joseph Needham and his work, Science and Civilization of China. Today's talk will be a continuation to explore the question posed by Joseph Needham. We're going to talk about Joseph Needham later in a short while. For those who have missed the talk, I will provide a very short and brief overview of who this person is. My main source for today's talk, I refer to various books to come up with the content for this talk. Most of the content for today's talk is based on this paper. This is a journal article that I retrieved. The title of this paper is The Needham Puzzle: Why the Industrial Revolution did not originate in China, written by Justin E. Fulin. This paper explores the different theories and hypotheses presented by different scholars on this question. Throughout today's talk, you will see the structure of this talk to be like this. There will be a hypothesis by a particular scholar, and the author here will try to prove or disprove the claim, and you will add on his own views on that claim. That will be how the structure will be like for today. We're going to go through these various topics for today. We're going to explore the science and technology of early ancient China. What was the state and condition of science at that point of time? We're also going to look into this theory here, which is called the high-level equilibrium trap. This is a popular hypothesis put up by a renowned scholar to explain why China's science later came to a standstill and remains stagnant. The last 2 points will be a combination of various remarks and hypotheses put up by different scholars. The mode of technological invention is a statistical related explanation to explain why science in China went on a decline. But I'm going to talk about it very briefly. I'm going to go into very detail. It is a little technical, so I'm just going to capture the essence of it and hope that it is easier for the audience to understand. Okay? Even though today's topic is on why the Industrial Revolution did not take place in China, this phenomenon, the Industrial Revolution, is strongly and closely related to the scientific revolution as well. We're going to explore the connection between these two phenomena. Modern science. Today, we are living in a world where much of our life is modeled after the Western society. Look at the blazer I'm wearing, look at the pants I'm wearing, look at the shoes I'm wearing. They are not Chinese. They are products of the West. And why is that so? Because the West was so powerful. Approximately after the 18th century, when the Industrial Revolution took place, the economies of the Western nations, Western Europe in particular, grew so large that they are so powerful. Other than the influence of their economic institutions, political institutions, as well as influence of society. Democracy, the ideas of democracy, the ideas of capitalism, the ideas of socialism, these are all ideas of the West. So we can see that the world we are living in is a world dominated by the West. And what is the cause of the rise of the West? There are probably many reasons, but one main reason that a lot of scholars have pointed out is the rise of modern science. Now, what is modern science? What is the Industrial Revolution? We are going to explore these terms in a short while. In comparison, the East, we are talking about China, we are talking about the Islamic world, okay, was seen to be backward compared to the West. The products of modern science the methods of using experiments to produce technology was seen as a product of the West. So the Westerners were very proud of their own achievements, and they lay claims to these scientific contributions. These are all the works of the Western world. But is that true? Now the West held that notion for a very long time until this person comes by. And his name is Joseph Needham. I explored about his works in my previous talk, but today I will just go through very briefly for those of you who might have missed the talk the last time. Joseph Needham was very curious about the history of science. Through some chance events, he realized that the notion that the West were superior in science might not be so accurate after all. So he got the hint that probably China's science was pretty advanced also in the earlier times. So he went to China, he went to do his research, he dig up the sources, encyclopedias or texts left behind by the ancient Chinese, and he made a catalog out of it. So this catalog has shown that a lot of inventions that we thought were Western in origin is actually Chinese in origin. So 4 great inventions, which is the paper, which is printing, gunpowder, compass. These 4 inventions were thought to be the main inventions that have transformed Europe from the Dark Ages to its Enlightenment. Now these 4 inventions were discovered by Joseph Needham that it has Chinese origins. So the Chinese were the ones who initially invented all this. So is it accurate to say that the birth of modern science is the product of Western civilization? We will have to rethink about that question. Early China had very advanced technology, thanks to the studies of Joseph Needham. Here we can see that the agricultural technology of China was quite far advanced. In the Han Dynasty, they were already using iron to make tools. So iron tools are efficient tools. When it comes to plowing the fields, it's a very efficient tool compared to the previous technologies. Okay, just give me a moment. Maybe somebody can help me to open the door at the sides so that the rest can come in. Okay, thank you. During the Han Dynasty, we see the introduction of iron tools. Moving on, in the 9th century, in between the Han Dynasty and the 9th century, something important happened as well. There was a migration of the Chinese from the north to the south, and that was also a very important event in China history. You see, when the Chinese were settled in the north, they were mainly cultivating dry land crops like millet. This sort of crops produce lesser yield. It has lesser productivity, meaning to say that for the same piece of plot of land, lesser amount of millet will be produced compared to rice. Now when the Chinese moved from the north to the south, they realized that the rice crops were very efficient. For the same plot of land, you would have grown much more rice. So that resulted in a boom in the Chinese population as well. Other than agriculture, we can see that the Chinese industry was also highly developed in terms of iron. They have reached the production of 150,000 tons in the late 11th century, and that was 5 to 6 times more than the European output on a per capita basis. The per capita basis meaning to say that your output is divided by your population, so that you have a better sense of comparison. Okay, so you can see that the Chinese were much more productive in terms of iron production, and also in terms of textile. Later we're going to talk about textile also, about during the Industrial Revolution. Now when it comes to textile, the Chinese people had already invented this reeling machine that is generated by water power. Okay, and this is a very efficient tool for the spinning of the threads. This historians claim that it's much more advanced than what you can see in Europe until the 1700s. Then the Europeans invented something that is more superior than this machine. So you can say that China, for the large part of history from then until the 1700s, has been dominating in terms of science and technology. In terms of its population, it is so large that it is quite difficult to conceive that how is the population able to sustain itself. Marco Polo, a very famous traveler, claimed so in 13th century. Suzhou is a part in China. Suzhou is so large that it measures about 40 miles in circumference. It has so many occupants, inhabitants, that one could not reckon their number. And Hangzhou, without doubt, the finest and most splendid city in the world. Anyone seeing such a multitude would believe it a stark impossibility that food could be found to fill so many mouths. Now Europe, in compared to China at that point of time, is completely different. Europeans, most of the population were poor, living standards were poor, the mortality rate was high, also people were dying at a much younger age compared to China, and a lot of them were undernourished. So it's quite amazing to see such a stark difference between Europe and China. So it will be very puzzling for us to figure out how is it so that Europe eventually managed to overtake China. Now, by the 14th century, China was already so advanced. China has already undergone its own agricultural revolution. Now, agricultural revolution is an important phenomenon that I have to mention here. Before the onset of industrial revolution, scholars claim that it was the success of agricultural revolution where there was a surplus of agricultural produce that provided the raw materials for the next phase, the Industrial Revolution. Without the Agricultural Revolution, you will not have the Industrial Revolution in Europe. Well, for China, they have already achieved their Agricultural Revolution much earlier than Europe, and it was said that China was probably the most cosmopolitan, technologically advanced, and economically powerful civilization in the world by the 14th century. Compared to China, the West was essentially still agrarian. I mean to say that it is still mostly based on agriculture, much poorer and underdeveloped. Now, China did not take full advantage of its early head start. China did not take the next move to advance to its industrial revolution. And it was during around the period of 17th century that the progress of science in the West accelerated at such a fast rate that it has exceeded China, and China began to lag further and further behind. So why is that so? Neham's puzzle comes in the form of these two questions. He's puzzled. After he compiled his works, he was so impressed by China's achievement in science that he started to formulate these two questions. And he wanted to explore, find out the answers to these two questions. And what are the questions? First, why was it China, not Europe or any other places in the world that was so advanced in the beginning? Why was China so advanced in comparison to other civilizations in the beginning? And then why isn't now China still maintaining that advantage and be above the rest? Why has it moved to the back seat? So these are the two questions posed by Meehan. And these questions have affected the academic world. Before that, this was not a question that scholars would think about. Meehan's puzzle has inspired scholars to explore this topic. And from these two questions, another question came about. Okay, that is, so if China was already so advanced in agriculture during the 13th century, why didn't industrial revolution take place during the 14th century, right after the agricultural revolution? For today's talk, we are going to explore these questions in details. Let's take a look at the Industrial Revolution. Throughout this talk, I will be inserting certain definitions of certain terms so that we can have a clearer picture of what we are dealing with and what is the scope. Now, the Industrial Revolution is said to begin in England, Great Britain, during the 18th century. And what started it and what was it about? You see, England was trying to improve its economy. So they came about with this revolution of using machines to do work. Now, having machines to do work is much better than having humans to do work, right? Now, the human probably is limited in the output. The human can only do so much within a day, but the machines can do much more. The machines are more efficient, and that helped England's economy. Using machines heavily in the textile industry. So the Industrial Revolution is a transition from the mode of production where you used to produce things from hands, and now that is replaced by machines. That is mainly what Industrial Revolution is about. And the output of this is high productivity and efficiency. Now, for the same period of time, you could produce more and faster compared to handmade. Now, other than that, we are not so keen today to explore the textile industry, the use of machines, but another underlying significant phenomenon. And that is what is so different about Industrial Revolution and the rest of the periods of history was the high rate of technological invention. That is to say, after the Industrial Revolution onwards, the rate of invention, things being invented, was so much faster. More things were being invented after the Industrial Revolution. That is the main distinction for this period of time. So, having that definition, we will have to rephrase our question. Now, we are not so concerned about, yes, we are still concerned about the Industrial Revolution, but we are not concerned with the underlying meaning behind it, which is why is it that the rate of invention in China did not pick up its rate after the 14th century. So now we are exploring this, the rate of invention. The high-level equilibrium trap. This is a very popular hypothesis put up by this scholar by the name of Mark Alden. In fact, if you go and Google, you should be able to see an article on it, about it on Wikipedia. So what does Mark Alden has to say about why China slowed down after that? Now, his reason is quite straightforward and makes a lot of sense. He felt that the main cause behind this was the man-to-land ratio. Now, what is man-to-land ratio? Meaning to say that you are comparing the number of population against the amount of cultivatable land that you have. So it's a simple theory, basically about overpopulation. So when your population starts to grow more and more and more, you have less space to work. You compete for resources. Each individual person who is producing, who's producing things in the first place, his output is reduced because they were competing for the same space. Makes a lot of sense. And probably it's because China kept growing and kept growing because it was so successful in the beginning. A lot of food, high production of food, that the population grew and grew and grew until a rate where it could not sustain itself. This is the theory, man to land ratio. In the beginning, China had favorable economic institutions that allow such a boom. Now the three factors that Alvin has identified are family farming, private land ownership, and the market system. So these three factors, when put together, allow for an effective system to spread technological invention. Not to also to mention that China was unified, okay, and the unification, it is easier to pass things or transfer things within the realm. Okay, so probably the government could instill laws to implement a certain technology, and whole countrywide they would implement that technology straight away. That's the advantage of having a unified state. That was the strength of China in the beginning, a unified state that allowed for the fast transferring of technology across the nation. Now, as you move further, as you go further, the population started to grow for China, and the overpopulation is made worse because of the culture of the Chinese. There is an emphasis of producing a male heir, okay, to take over the property or to take over the ownership of what is left of the family. You see, if let's say this family tried the first time, the second time, still a girl, and the family is going to try the third time, okay, and that would mean that you have lots and lots of infants, high population. The three diagrams here is an illustration that I'd like to show you. If you look at the first, okay, on my right, you have one person to all that land. It's a heaven for this person. No competition, he could grow. Okay, and when you have 4 person there, still not so bad. Anyway, this land is so big, one person can't use up the whole land anyway. Okay, this is the ideal state where you have just the right number of people to work that piece of land. But when you have that situation, that is just too much. Now everybody is just probably using one small piece of land there, okay, because of the limited space you have. That is the problem of overpopulation. Now, the problem of overpopulation has always been occurring in ancient China. When we look at the Zhou dynasty, that was precisely what happened. The realm that the Zhou people had to them was overpopulated. So they have to look for new lands to conquer and colonize. The human success story is also the story of colonization. To move to a new land beyond where you are staying, okay, and grow the land. Other than the resource constraint that overpopulation would result in, it also has other implications. One main implication is that labor became cheap. You have a large population, you have lots of employees waiting for you to take your job. So you could, as an employee, you could afford to pay lesser for each worker. Right? Not like a situation in Europe where labor was scarce, was not enough labor. Now because of that, for Europe it went another direction. We will talk about that later. Let's talk about China for now. Labor is so cheap that there is no incentive for enterprise owners to think of or to want to demand devices that cut down labor. Now the enterprise owner will be thinking, since the labor is so cheap, I just pay cheaply for these people, they can still do the same quality of job for me. There's no desire to get devices to help them save costs, labor costs. For China, the case is that the population had grown to a point where there was no longer any need for labor-saving devices. Now, how was it in Europe at that time? In comparison, Europe enjoyed a better man-to-land ratio. Europe was underdeveloped compared to China due to the feudal system. Now, Europe, its land size, in comparison to China, is much smaller also. Okay, if you are looking at land that can be cultivated, it is even less. So with that, the Europeans have to come up with the creativity to make full use of the restriction that they have. How do I make the best use of what I have with this scarcity of land compared to China? How do I make the full use of it? How do I produce more? Now they turn to labor-saving devices. There's also another factor that resulted in the desire for labor-saving device. I have to mention that in history, in European history, something important happened. It was a very disastrous, the Black Death. So during that period of time, this disease broke out and a lot of people died. European population was cut down drastically. So with such a small number of population, there's not enough people to work. Employers can't find enough people to work. Even if they can pay a lot of money, there's not people there to work for you. So they have to think of ways to overcome these difficulties. This resulted in the demand for technology that can help me save labor. This technology can help me to replace workers, to do things for me. As a result, there is a strong need in Europe to save labor, as they cannot strongly feel the lack of labor force in Europe. Now, what do you think about this high-level equilibrium trap? Does it make sense? It sounds very convincing, right? It seems very logical. But to prove that this theory is correct, we have to do some kind of experimentation. Now, to test this hypothesis, it's about man-to-land ratio, right? Okay, so if the theory says that it is because of bad man-to-land ratio in China that resulted in the decline of science, perhaps I can do something like this, very easy. I measure the population, I measure the amount of land in China that China has, and I plot out the graph. So if it correlates correctly, that is to say, if I do see a drop in the ratio, and also it corresponds to a drop in the rate of technology, that means the hypothesis is correct, mathematically. So is that the case? No. Okay, according to Lin, which is the author of the journal article that I'm referring to, according to Lin, he did a tabulation and he found that it's not true. Okay, he calculated, he had the population size and the amount of land, okay, during China's history. For China's past, and it is shown that during periods of time when the per capita acreage was high, that is to say that there are more land to a person. Okay, by right, when you have more land to a person, you should have higher rate of technology, right? According to his hypothesis, but it's not the case. Okay, it did not went up. So the man-to-land ratio is not so accurate after all. Now, other than statistics, let's do a social experiment. Okay, let's have a raise of hand. Okay, when you are traveling on the MRT at the basement level, you need to go up. There's 3 ways for you to go out. You can take the stairs, you can take the escalator, you can take the lift. Okay, who takes the escalator? Wow, almost everybody. No one takes the stairs, right? Exactly. Every morning when I go for work, I see that the queue at the escalator is so long. No queue at the stairs, but nobody goes up the stairs, including myself. This is a social experiment to tell you that everybody wants to do things the easy way. Okay. Now you see for Alvin, he's saying that for certain situations, people don't mind doing things the more effort way for his theory. Okay. Now Lin, he feels that the claim that there is no need for labor-saving device is not accurate. Now when you look at it closer, it doesn't really make sense now if you think about it. Everybody always wants to do things easier with less effort. Okay? And when you look at China's peasants at that point of time, it's not really the case that they have so much labor that they don't really have to do so much per person. It's still very strenuous for them, according to the studies. Now for a farmer, you have to do double cropping. That means your first crop is cultivated already, you move on to do the next crop simultaneously perhaps. Okay, so on the average, in a year of 12 months, okay, peasants probably only enjoy 1 month of leave. No need to do any work for about 1 to 1.5 months out of 12 months. Now, does it make sense to say that the peasants don't need any device to help them do work? Not really. It's so much hard work for them. So if there's any device that comes along to help them in their work, of course, they would be happy to accept it. So it's not, according to Dean, it's not correct, okay, to say that there is no demand for labor-saving device. There is always demand for labor-saving device because everybody wants to do things easier. So the Industrial Revolution failed to take place in China not because of lack of demand, not because people don't need new technology, but there is a lack of supply. People are not providing you that technology. So why is there a lack of supply? Okay. Moving forward, before we go into that, we need to be clear about certain terms here. Now, science and technology, we usually think of it as a very blurred concept. We think of it as something similar to each other. Okay, science is technology, technology is science, but it's not really that case. Other than this, I'm going to define what science is, what technology is, and I'm also going to define what modern science is and pre-modern science is. Now, science is a body of knowledge. Okay, something intangible. It's in your mind. Okay, it's the knowledge and awareness of nature. You know properties of nature. You study the property of nature. So it's something in an intangible form. But technology is the output of scientific knowledge. Now, scientists and engineers are different also in this sense, along this sense of definition. Scientists are people who, loosely speaking, okay, who work in the lab all day, and he might not produce a single technology that's useful to the society. But engineers are those who takes the work of scientists and produce something out of it. Perhaps, okay, let's take an example of the laws of physics, okay, the laws of friction. Now, laws of friction is a knowledge, it's the awareness of how nature works. Train designers, they are aware of the laws of nature, the laws of friction, so when they design a train, they are able to design it in such a way that it reduces friction and it improves the efficiency of the speed of the train. So the engineers are the ones who convert the scientific knowledge into something useful. So technology-wise is the product of knowledge. So these are the two different things. And in the beginning, science and technology were different things. Even in Europe, science is considered as a set of philosophical ideas that the influential and rich people are interested in. Now, these people, they are not interested in technology. Technology is the works of craftsmen, artisans. Okay, these are considered considered to be in the lower social class. Now, these people have to convert, they have to produce things to make a living, and they are despised upon. This is very different. Science and technology, in the beginning, did not really merge and gel that well together. It was after the scientific revolution that science is to be made into a piece of technology. Such a notion began to come about. Okay. Now, what about the different science? What is pre-modern science and what is modern science? In ancient China, largely, most of the inventions resulted from experience-based inventions. So what do I mean by experience-based? That is to say that the person was not deliberately sitting down to think of what to make, but it was chanced upon during his daily course of life. Most of the inventions in the past were made using such a method. Okay. That is also to say why certain things you cannot find the origins to who invented the particular technology, because it was a result of spontaneous activity. This person probably is just doing what he was doing all along, and then somehow there was a spurt of innovation and creativity. He realized that this is the way to do things better, and the invention came about. Because of that, such inventions are free in terms of cost, okay, and it is random and spontaneous. Now, what about modern science? Now, modern science is very different. Modern science resulted from deliberate action. Somebody sits in a lab whole day and think about it and try to do something, try to produce something out of it. So it is intense and deliberate, and it's costly also. You need to spend money to build a lab. You need to spend money to buy the necessary equipment to do your experiment. And it is systematic. There's a step A, B, C, D way of doing it. Now, for modern science, we have a very structural way of doing it. First, you come up with a hypothesis. That is to say that you come up with a guess. Oh, I think blah blah blah. That's your guess statement. Next, you move on to test your variables. Okay, you set up your experiment. You change certain parameters in the experiment to prove that this is the result that is causing the change. Okay, then you make a statement and a conclusion. Then you publish your work. That is modern science. It's very different from ancient science, pre-modern science. Let me give you some examples to illustrate so you have a better understanding of the difference. For example, an experience-based invention in the form of the horse harness. Now, apparently nobody invented this because he was sitting the whole day think about what is the best way to come about with a horse harness. He didn't do experiments, but it was invented from daily interactions with the surrounding. Okay, the West. Okay, look at this diagram here. This was the most earliest horse harness used for many centuries. In the West, they are still using this. Okay, but for China, they have progressed from this to this to this. Okay, this is called the throat and girth harness that was used in the West. Basically, the harness goes around the throat of the horse, and when the horse moves forward and carries its load, it gets choked. Because it's just around the throat. Doesn't make sense, but the Westerners and the Chinese people use it early. Okay, but later they realize it's not working very well. but for the Westerners, they were using it all along until very late. Okay, so for the Chinese, later on they moved to this. Okay, this is called the trace harness. Here, instead of the harness going around the throat, it goes around the chest. Okay, what inspired the Chinese to invent this? According to Needham, he came up with two suggestions. Now, one suggestion is that the Chinese people, there were some Chinese people who settled along the north of China. Now, what is at the north of China? You have the desert. Okay, and in the desert is a very sandy area. Your horse will not be able to move the load if it gets stuck in the sand. So probably the Chinese, when they are using this, they realize that, hey, my horse is always stuck in the sand, and with such a harness, I cannot move my load. Okay, so there's a demand for new technology, for a new kind of harness. Now the second suggestion is from human beings' own experience. Now in China, you have rivers, water bodies. There's a lot of boats in China. Certain boatmen would have realized that if I want to move my boat upstream or up the shore, I don't put the rope around my neck. That would choke me. And he realized that, oh, if I move my rope here to my chest area and I move forward, I could move the boat upstream or up the shore. So the chest is a much more powerful area to support the load. And now they draw the connection. Oh yes, maybe I could do something the same for the horse harness, and they have this. So here you can see that it is an invention that is based on a spontaneous spur moment of inspiration. Okay, but what about modern science? Modern science is very different. Do you know who this person is? You drink fresh milk. Yeah, your fresh milk is because of him, okay? Yes, Pasteur, yes. Now he's just shared his story, so you know, okay, that's how modern science comes about. Now for Louis Pasteur, he did not invent vaccine the same way as how the horse harness was invented. In fact, it was a deliberate. He knew that diseases were affecting people. So he would sit down in his lab, he took samples of blood, he took samples of bacteria, he investigated them under the microscope. Okay, so you can see that it's a very deliberate action where you spend time and effort to come to a conclusion. For Pasteur, his invention of vaccine came in two stages. So the first stage was that the anthrax disease was very serious in Europe at that point of time. A lot of people died from anthrax, and he felt that he needed to do something for the society to find out a cure for anthrax. Okay? At that point of time, it sounds very silly now, but it is true. At that point of time, the knowledge on diseases was not very good. In Europe, people believe that the body is made of 4 elements, and if you fall sick, one of your elements are not in balance. So one element is too strong probably. Now blood is one of the elements in these 4 elements that maintains a balance in your body. When you have fever, when you fall sick, very sick, one of the most common methods to treat you is bloodletting. Now the doctor, the physician takes a blade, makes a cut in your wrist and let you bleed. And that is supposed to cure you. Okay, now some people got cured not because bloodletting was effective, but probably mentally they believe that this was the method to cure them, so they recovered after that. But most people died from bloodletting. Okay, so up to this point of time, people still believe in bloodletting until Pasteur came along, alright, and he says no, diseases is not caused by imbalance of elements in the body. It's caused by a microorganism, the bacteria. Other people don't believe him. You are talking rubbish. It's the imbalance of elements. So he has to try to convince them. He did an experiment, very convincing experiment. He took some animals that are sick with anthrax. Okay, he took blood samples. He separated the bacteria from the blood sample. Now with the bacterial specimen, he injected the bacterial specimen into animals that were healthy initially. After he did that, these animals died. So this is a clear way to say that yes, it's the bacteria that causes the disease and results to death. That was the first step. Now the second step is that, okay, now that I know bacteria is causing disease, he realized that the human body would develop resistance to diseases. Okay? He came up with the concept of vaccine, where he extracted samples of certain bacteria, he weakens it using a special way, and he insert the weakened bacteria into the body. So because it's a weakened version of the bacteria doesn't kill you, but your body develops resistance to it. So that is the story of vaccine. And that's the product of modern science. Okay, here is an explanation in the form of statistics. Okay, I'm going to explain how this table works. And this explanation is put up by Lin. His explanation is that for inventions, efficiency of a new technology spreads out like this in a normative curve. Okay? In general, everything in nature spreads out like this. One way to explain it is your height. Now a lot of people have different heights, but most people would fall under the average. Okay, so this would be the average height, where the probability of you being here is the highest. Now talking about heights, okay, not talking about invention, now heights. Okay, so if you are very short, the probability of you being very short is very little. The probability of you being very tall is also very little. Probability of you being in the middle is quite high. Okay, this is what the curve means. The spread and distribution of probability. Now applying this to the spread of inventions. Some inventions sucks. Okay, it falls here. Some inventions are just average, just nice. And some inventions are very efficient in terms of productivity. But the chances of that is very low. Very low. Here in the middle is quite high. Okay, that's what it means. So here, the shaded area means that if your invention falls here, it means that you produce a technology that is quite decent. Now, for you to improve the productivity of your technology, this curve is not stationary. Okay, it's stationary if you don't do anything about it. But it can be deliberately moved forward, like this. Okay, when it moves forward like this, it increases the probability of producing better technology. Now, by doing that, you need to add in certain variables to move your curve from the left to the right. Okay? So how do you move the curve from the left to the right? These four factors will move the curve from the left to the right, improving the chances of a successful invention. But take note, this is about probability. So maybe one day you are lucky, you just buy one photo and you still get top price, compared to the person who buy 10 times and don't get it. Okay? It's about probability. So for the inventor who is not very clever, he could also make a big hit, but probability of it is low. But these four factors will increase the probability. Now the first factor is the knowledge, the pool of knowledge that you have, how much you know, the pool of scientific knowledge that you have. Second factor is your personal intelligence, how smart you are. Alright, the third factor would be the kinds of materials that you have with you. Now when we look at milestones in human history, you have your Stone Age. you have your Bronze Age. You see, for Stone Age, bronze was not available to them at that point of time, so the best materials they could do with was stone. Now the Stone Age, there's a period that signifies tools made of stones, predominantly stones. Now stone tools compared to bronze tools, which is better? Bronze tools, because for bronze tools it's easier to mold compared to stone. Okay, and that created a jump in terms of inventions for human civilization when they moved from the Stone Age to the Bronze Age, because of the availability of bronze to them. So that's what point 3 is about, materials that you have available for invention. And the fourth is the surrounding geography. Okay, the geography in terms of the physical surrounding around you. So what are the factors in early China that has moved the curve forward or increases the probability of invention, successful invention? Now, it is the population. China has always enjoyed large population. In terms of the population compared to Europe, China had twice the population of Europe until the 1300s. So with that, it means that you have a higher chance of trial and error. Okay. Other than that, it also means that there's a higher chance that you have more smart people in your population because you have a larger population. This can be explained with an analogy, a simple analogy like buying lottery. So if you buy lottery one time, chance of you winning is smaller. Maybe you buy 100 times, chance of 1 out of 100 that you strike is higher, right? Yeah, so this is why it means a higher population gives you a better chance of invention. Now the early Chinese population was large, so large compared to Europe, so that is why the rate of invention was higher for China. And other than that, the physical environment also influenced the output of technological invention. One very important event that took place was the migration of the Chinese population from the north to the south. Because of the political turmoil that China was going through, the north of China was invaded by the barbarians. A lot of the Chinese ran away to the south that is safer. They also discovered that the south is much wetter than the north. More water in the south. Rice grows well in water. There's a change in the staple diet from millet to rice. And rice proves to be a better crop compared to millet in terms of its yield. Rice produces higher yield compared to the northern drylands. Because of the exposure to the south, there's a change in the physical environment. So there's potential, lots of potential for them to harness the potential of the south. That there was a burst of inventions during the 8th to 12th century, and these inventions were mostly related to rice farming and also to the geography of the south. For example, water transportation. I mentioned that the south is wet, there's more water bodies there. Because of that, people are settling in the south, and because of the exposure to the water bodies, they find the need to come up with a better water transportation. Technology related to water transportation developed. There was a high rate of inventions related to water transportation and also related to rice farming. Now, after the burst of the inventions from the 8th to the 12th century, probability became smaller already because whatever you can invent is invented. Unless you move to a new place, unless you have new materials, unless you have new breakthroughs, in ideas, what is there, the full potential has already been harnessed and fully exploited already. You have reached the bottleneck. So after the 12th century onwards, most of the inventions are small modifications. Let me illustrate this with a point of your smartphone. I used to own an S3, Samsung Galaxy S3. I look at S6, it looks more or less the same, maybe better camera, looks nicer, better battery life, but in terms of functions, does it really differ that much? Not really. You see that you have already reached the bottleneck. The first breakthrough was the shift from your Nokia handphones where your screen is color but no apps. When you move to smartphones with apps, that was the first breakthrough. But after that, what is so different about the various smartphones? It's more or less the same. We have reached the bottleneck. So poor China, they have developed already so much that they reach a phase that is stagnant for them. They can't make any major breakthrough. That is the best they can. But what about Europe? What was it like in Europe? Well, for Europe, population is an issue for them. It was quite bad for them that they have a smaller population, and also after the Black Death, there's a reduction in population. There's a limitation to what they can do. So they make the best use out of it. They develop a new way of science, which is the experimental method, which I mentioned earlier. Now with experiment method, population size does not matter anymore, because the scientist sits in the lab the whole day and do experiments, doing try and errors. Now one scientist doing experiment in a year is as much as 1,000 farmers trying to do something during their lifetime. So the constraints of a small population is overcome. With experiment methods, you can overcome this. Okay? And why the Europeans were able to keep moving their curve to the right? It's because of the integration of science with technology. If you recall, earlier on I mentioned that science and technology were distinctive things at the beginning. Okay, they were individual bodies. At this point of time, they realized that with the pool of scientific knowledge, you are able to create a technology based on that. And that gives you potential to go to the new heights, to greater heights. In other words, Industrial Revolution is about scientific revolution. Scientific revolution is the shift of invention, that it used to be about experience-based inventions, shifting to experimental-based inventions. The story of Industrial Revolution is about the story of Scientific Revolution. And why is it that Scientific Revolution failed to take place in China? That is the second big question that we are going to answer. With that, then we will solve the whole mystery to Neham's puzzle. Let's go back to the talk. The next big question. So why is it that the Industrial Revolution did not occur in China? Scholars study this topic and came to a conclusion it has something to do with the society, the social context of the West and China, and also the political situation difference between these two areas. So let's take a closer look at that. Okay, our modern science is about active experimentation, and other than that is also the application of maths to the observations of nature. It's quite amazing to realize that everything in this world has an order in it and is regulated in the form of mathematics. So with this regularity, you could always predict what's going to happen next. Okay. Now this mathematization of hypothesis about nature did not take place in China, and that's a puzzle for us to figure out. But in terms of experiments, Chinese people have been doing that already. But mathematics, applying mathematics to nature, maybe not so much. Okay, but for experimental methods, the Chinese have already been doing that since ancient times. So let me give you an example of the story of the gunpowder discovery. It's quite a well-known story. Some Taoist priests were trying to experiment with the elixir of life. They were trying to create something that when you drink, you can have immortality. You will not age, you will not die. And when they were mixing the chemicals together, those who were early alchemy or chemistry, okay? And when they were mixing the chemicals together, suddenly it caught fire, and there was a small explosion, and that is how the gunpowder came about. So the gunpowder originally was meant to enhance life, but it ended up to be something taking away lives. The irony of the gunpowder. Okay, so from this observation, you can see that the Chinese were already actively doing experiments. So it's not that experiments methods were lacking in China. So what is it that inhibits the growth of modern science in China? In Niham's book, he did not only just record the catalogue of Chinese inventions, he also tried to solve the two questions that he put forward. Now, his explanation for the difference is in the political social structure. Now, for Europe, you have an aristocratic feudalism, a very different system from China, which runs on a bureaucratic system. So, what are the main differences between these two systems? Okay, it's in the next slide. Okay, I'll deal with the difference between the two systems in a while. Let's look at the rise of merchants first. In my previous slide here, I have said that Niham proposed that because Europe had an aristocratic feudalism system, this system promoted the growth of a mercantile class. So what is a mercantile class? Basically, it's a class of merchants. Merchants' livelihood is dependent on trading. They buy something cheap and they sell something more expensive, and they earn money out of it. Now, is that moral? Okay. Now, for Europe in the past, like China as well, both these civilizations despise the merchants. Now, for Europe, the case is that the church find the merchant activities of trading to be immoral and against the will of God. So there was suppression of the merchants, but the merchants, as we all know, they have wealth. Now, wealth brings you power. Towards the Middle Ages, during the 13th century, the merchants became richer and richer and more powerful. Powerful enough to challenge the powers of the feudal lords and the king themselves. They have accumulated wealth enough to buy lands. Okay, the power in Europe is dependent to a certain extent amount of land that you have. You see, for the feudal system in Europe, this is how it works. After the fall and decline of Rome, central power has weakened. So the individual states were quite weak against the barbarian invasion, so they have to think of some way to retain their allies. Now, this is the way they used. The king has possession of this amount of land. He finds his loyal followers and supporters and say to them, now come to me, I shall give you these lands as fiefs. Now with these lands, you can do what you want on this land. You can tax the people. Okay. In return for giving you these lands, you must repay me in terms of a military service. So if somebody attacks me, you must send army to defend me. So this is a trading system in a way that both the interests of the king and the feudal lords are protected. So they benefit each other. That's the feudal system. Okay, but this feudal system could only sustain for so long. You see, the feudal system is built on a system of loyalty and trust. Now, the feudal lords will be loyal to the king because they receive the land from the feudal lord directly. So they will repay in gratitude. Now, the problem with this feudal system is that the land will be passed on to the descendants of the feudal lords. It's a bit like the Chinese system, why the feudal system weakens in China during the Zhou dynasty. After many generations, okay, let's look at China. So China also has a feudal system during the Zhou times, and it's also the same system where the king gives lands to the loyal supporters or to the relatives. Okay, but after many generations, the connection has disappeared already. So look at the fourth, let's say we are looking at the fifth generation of the feudal lords. You pass on to the son, the grandson. Do you think that descendant will feel any connection to the king? No, they have no dealings. They did not receive the land from the king, the current king, but it was their ancestors. There's no connection there anymore, no sense of gratitude there anymore. So towards the later part of the feudalism stage in Europe, there were a lot of infightings. The feudal lords take no regard of the king or the other lords, so they fought against each other, and this weakens the aristocracy. It creates a power vacuum where another class could rise to power, and that is the merchant class. Now the merchants in Europe were extremely powerful during the Middle Ages. They were so powerful that in the case, the city of Paris in France was built with the help of merchants. Without the merchants, the city of Paris would not have been built. And there are certain towns which free themselves from the control of the feudal lord and sustain themselves from the support of merchants. The merchants are a very powerful class in Europe. What the rise of the merchant class has resulted is the demand of technology. The private enterprise, the private company, provided an extra stimulation for invention. So for example, the merchants, when it comes to weapons like guns, they welcome the guns, because with the guns, it provided them extra protection during their travels to other countries, and they are willing to pay more for these for guns that are more efficient. So with this demand, people are motivated to create better guns to sell to the merchants and earn money out of it. So the rise of the merchant class has created a more demand for technology. And how was it like for the merchants of China? Needham believes that the merchants in China were having were facing very bad situation. They were being oppressed. Now the merchants in the social hierarchy of Chinese were being placed in the lowest of the rank. This is because the merchants are seen as parasites. They don't produce anything. Okay, they take what the farmer produces and sell it to someone else and make money out of it. This is very unethical of them, according to the Confucian social hierarchy of how they view merchants. And merchants are greedy people who only like to suck money and blood out of you. Alright, so they are being despised. The officials try to control merchants. The emperors also try to control merchants. Now the merchants, if you allow them to gain power, they can be actually very powerful to threaten the state. We see two activities here, examples of government interference on commercial activities. One is a famous incident of the Han Dynasty, Han Wudi, where Han Wudi was trying to raise funds for his military campaigns, and he saw that the merchants were earning a lot from the salt and iron industry. Han Wudi decided to take this away from the merchants and control it himself. And salt and iron became a state monopoly. This is a case of interference from the government on commercial activities. Another example is the 12th century entrepreneur Wang Ho. He built up an ironwork industry, small enterprise of 500 men. When he was doing very well, the Chinese officials tried to interfere in his business. He attacked the Chinese officials, alright, and then eventually the officials retaliated, killed him, and executed him. You can see the conflict of interest between the merchants and the government, and it is usually the government on the winning side. For the the merchants in Europe is quite different. The merchants in Europe are so powerful, even more powerful than the lords or the kings. So that is so much for Needham's explanation. Another scholar, his name is Wen Yuanqian. Okay, Wen Yuanqian's explanation is the competition in Europe. You see, in Europe, they do not have a centralized system where the central government has a lot of power and authority over various aspects of life. But in Europe, there were different power centers. You have the state, you have the church. The church is also very powerful. Okay, the church is powerful enough to introduce new ideas or influence the people. So there were competitions between church and church, state and church, and state between state. You see, Europe was made of different states, right? You have France, you have England, you have Spain, you have Italy, different states. So there's a lot of competition, and with this competition, there could never be a condition where one ideology remains dominant, okay, across the country. There will be competition, there will be exchange of various ideas. Each ideas could still stay as powerful competing ideas. But for China, it's ruled by one dominant system. So the Chinese government used Confucianism ideas as the most dominant ideology in China, and it remains so. Other new ideologies could not emerge because of the strong central government. So two explanations to why there was no scientific revolution in China. So what is the author's take on this? Well, let's look at what Lin says. Lin refutes these two arguments. He doesn't believe in them. Now for the comments on Needham's views, merchants actually are not so bad in China, not as bad as what Needham says. In fact, during the early Han Dynasty, there are a lot of successful merchants and moneylenders who were seen as social equals to kings and vassal kings and lords. Okay, so it's not such a bad thing after all for merchants in China. In fact, there were a lot of business and financial related organizations that emerged in China, and also if you have money, you can buy a degree. Okay, no need to study. You can buy a degree here. Rich people can buy degrees and buy officialdom with money. Okay, so merchants not so bad after all, according to Lin's observations and studies. And if you're not good in studying, it's okay. If you cannot study well, it's okay. You can do business. Okay. Over the young men who are not interested in studying, never mind. If you are good in being a merchant, just go to the commercial sector. You still can thrive over there. What about Qian's views on the fact that the Chinese government stifle new ideologies? Not so true also. Yes, even though Confucianism is the main ideology, there is also introduction of new forms of Confucianism. Example is the Ming Dynasty, where you have Wang Yangming. Wang Yangming introduced and proposed a new form of Confucianism ideologies, which was resisted by a lot of people at that point of time. But it still managed to gather a big following. There was a lot of supporters who subscribed to this ideology, managed to set up schools, and the philosophy of the school of thought still remains in China. It did not get extinguished after Wang Yangming's passing. So that is to say that it is not true to say that Chinese society is resistant to new ideas. New ideas can still come in. So then what is the problem with Chinese society? Why is it not picking up modern science? So this is Lin's argument. It's not so much of suppressing intellectual creativity. It's more of providing the incentive for intellectual creativity. So what was the lack of incentive? Let's see. You see, for China, the highest and most prestigious job is to be an official. So most people will want to study Confucianism texts because that's the way for you to get into officialdom. And most people would dedicate their time and effort to read Confucian classics. And this is the scary part. Let me show you the numbers here. Students have to memorize the text that is 431,286 characters. If you memorize 200 characters a day, you need 6 years. My degree takes me 3 years. Only. Okay, can you imagine the amount of time and effort needed to get a job in official domain? Yes. So other than memorizing Confucian classics, the students also have to read commentaries, philosophical readings, historical readings, literary works. And during your civil exams, you have to write essays and poems in the examination. So that already takes so much time. Do you think you still have time to read about science and any other thing? No. So that already takes away so much energy and effort. So there's no time for even the smart people. Of course, there's a lot of smart people in China, okay? But they devote their attention and energy to Confucian classics, not to science, because that takes away, maybe later, okay? Because that takes away the time, that takes away the time and energy they could have to devote to other learnings. You see, let me go back to this slide. You see, for a successful scientist, he needs to be well versed with the scientific knowledge. Okay, that also takes time for you to receive the training and learning to acquire the knowledge. So a gifted scholar in China do not have the additional resources and time to acquire this required human capital to become a successful scientist. So that is why there were no modern science that gave rise in China. Maybe after the whole talk.
Okay. The comment on that one.
Yes.
Maybe that's why, right, we look at ancient Chinese history, right, inventions start to go down, right, at the time of right? Because the later the time, right, the more history the person has to read. The more history you have to read, the less
Maybe also, towards the later part, you will have more classics with more text, correct? You memorize more. Okay, so for the conclusion, we are coming to the end of the talk. For the conclusion part, I would like to add on to say that the story of science is not about just the West and China. The story of science is about a fusion of the product from different parts of the world. Now, even for the Greek civilization, they also took something from the Babylon civilization or earlier civilization to add on to their own theories. Okay. Now, the product of science is not just that of the West, but it is from all parts of the world. During the 8th to the 13th century was the golden age of the Islamic world. Arabic science was on its peak. In fact, there's this work called the Book of Optics in 1021. It's very amazing because at that age, this is quite early compared to the emergence of modern science. There is already such a work that is very similar to modern science. But in this work, the author proves the effects of optics. He came out with a statement, a problem, a hypothesis. Okay, then he do active testing, and he writes a book and he publishes it. This is very much like modern scholarly publication. So you look at this is already so early. So experimental methods like such is, you can say, origins from the Arabic world, not the Western world, but the Western world adapted it and make it better, and transform it to the predominant method of invention for them. Why is the Needham puzzle so important? Why do we want to know what is the reason for the emergence of industrial revolution or the emergence of scientific revolution? Is because this is the story of the rise of human civilization. Now, when we truly investigate the question, we would know where science is heading in our current age. Is it still on the right track? How do we sustain the growth of science? How do we sustain the growth of human civilization? Now, in our modern society, we have faced many problems because of science and technology, because of industrialization. We have damaged our environment, we have caused pollution. So are we able to continue our current way of life in a sustained manner? That is a big question. And that is why the Needham puzzle is so important. Perhaps now the question is not so much of why is science developed in the Western Europe, but how, what were the activities, how did the European activities lead to the form of science that now dominates the entire world. Okay, that is the end of the talk. I hope you enjoyed yourself. Thank you.